Today we're going to be talking about kind of upgrades and additional features. This is the miscellaneous section. And then I've got a section on troubleshooting that we've talked about a little bit of that, but it's just dedicated to that. So let's just dive right in here. So we've talked a little bit about zero-touch deployment, kind of when we were first looking at the local managers in section 1. We have a feature where they can automatically find the control center, using DHCP or DNS options. Either, they search for a particular DNS entry, Uplogix-control-center, to try and find the control center, or else you can use SRV records, which are one of the more uncommon DNS options. DHCP options. That's wrong in that slide. Should be SRV records in your DHCP options. So yeah, basically when we give you an IP address via DHCP, it can also tell you where the control center is going to be and what port to use to connect. So can be useful when you're setting up new Uplogix. So then for upgrades, usually we release software twice a year, not on any fixed schedule, but really kind of just as things get done. But generally, yeah, there are two, major or minor revisions. We will also release patch versions as needed if there are, important CVEs that come up or bugs that we want to fix. In general, they both, the local managers and the control center need to be on the same version for them to communicate. Basically, if they're, off on the minor revision, they go into what we call minimal heartbeat and they don't synchronize everything. They still report alarms, but other than that, they don't, if you make setting changes on one side, it doesn't propagate to the other side. So we need to have them all in the same version, more or less, so that they can keep everything in sync. Depending on, what's going on, what we've released, we might just patch the control centers or just the local managers. Just depends on, what's in the release and what it targets. So when you need to do an upgrade, the control centers, there's no, click file, upgrade the control center process. So what we do is we have you guys schedule that with our support team. And they will usually, remotely help you with that upgrade. If need be, we can kind of send you the instructions or walk you through it. But we generally prefer to do it ourselves just to make sure everything goes smoothly. And then, the control center will be down for usually about 30 minutes while we're doing that upgrade. And then the local managers themselves, usually their upgrades are pretty quick too, about half an hour between, sending them the file, downloading it, restarting, applying the patch, sometimes less even, especially with the newer hardware. So for the local managers, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. Either on the command line, run config update. And that's so nice because it gives you a byte count as it downloads the file. And if there are any problems, like if it fails the CRC check or anything, you'll get feedback right away. That can be especially useful if you have low bandwidth sites that you're having trouble getting upgraded. Sometimes, you can run it on the command line and it'll run through. I guess I should mention in terms of low bandwidth sites, we also have a method where we can limit the bandwidth used for that file transfer if we need to. Sometimes that helps with those sites that have real low bandwidth coming in. But of course, the downside to that is that you have to run that on each individual local manager. If you have a lot, that can be time consuming. Instead, generally, we recommend you try and do that from the control center. You can schedule mass updates using the schedule task system that we went over, where you can identify all the local managers using a filter and then, apply the update. Again, that kind of goes off into the ether. You can, see what's going on with those from the schedule task tab. You can look through the execution details, but, the CLI gives you just a little bit more immediate feedback. When you do those upgrades, the new code is downloaded to the system either from the network somewhere, usually the control center. But we also support getting that from FTP or HTTP sites. Or you can plug in a USB drive with the upgrade file. And if you do have sites that you really just can't get the file across the network to them, that can be a way to get those systems upgraded using a USB file. Once the file's copied to the local manager, then we go ahead and do a validation check on it, make sure that it didn't get corrupted during the download. Um, and then, of course, if it's, you provide something other than an Uplogix upgrade file, it's not going to use it. So you can't break your Uplogix that way. And then we extract it, prepare for upgrade, and then we restart the Uplogix to apply that upgrade. Which the Uplogix might be down for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe 20 on the old systems, while they apply that upgrade. But then once it restarts, it'll fire up again. You should be able to SSH to it. It'll report back to the control center. And you'll be able to see its version number and stuff there, make sure it looks good. Again, on the CLI, you can use different methods to transfer that file. Like I said, mostly we'll get it across the network, whether that's from the control center or from, a HTTP site or FTP SCP if you've got it staged there. Yeah, if you try to use the same version, it won't apply it. It will say, hey, we're already on this version, it won't bother. And then you can, if you need to downgrade a local manager for any reason, I don't think it should probably ever come up, but you can. But a lot of the times we need to perform a factory reset on them after that or remove them from the control center just so that they synchronize properly after the downgrade. So, issues that you might run into when you're running those upgrades, right? If we're getting the file off of an external server, obviously we have to, have a proper login and so forth. And then, yeah, sometimes on those file servers, getting the file name and the directory, the syntax can be a little specific about that, right? If you've done much SCP or secure copy work, you know how that kind of works. Your user logs into a particular directory, and then you might have to specify the absolute path using that first / in front of home in order for it to get the file from the right place. Again, if you have sites with real bandwidth issues, sometimes we can fail the upgrade based on that. It just is a certain amount of dropped packets and the process just fails. So those are the most common things we see. Usually it goes quite smoothly. Now in the control center again, you can upgrade them using the schedule button or the schedule tab. If you want to do an individual local manager, you just go to that local manager's page, click schedule, and then select the update file. And then it works the same way if you create a filter, you just have to make the filter first, and then you select upgrade from the schedule tab, select the file that we want to use for the upgrade, and then you're good to go. Now that file archive, speaking of which, this lives under the administration tab in the control center. And this is a great place for you to upload OS images or, if you need to update the configuration on a system. You can take those files, you can load them into the control center web interface, and then they're available for all of the local managers to grab from there. You have to specify a category name. You can give it a description if you want. But yeah, it's a great place to upload those update files, OS images, and then of course the Uplogix upgrade images as well. Once you've got them loaded up there, you use the schedule task, right? Select update, select which file you want to use, and then there's the schedule part itself. You can schedule it to happen right away, or during a change window if you need to. This is just showing how to create a filter for multiple local manager upgrades, right? You just select a filter. Usually you're going to use the inventory groups probably from there. But then once you've got the filter created, you do it the same way. You select the image you want to use, and you schedule it for whenever you want it to take place. So we also have the ability to, and we're probably going to try to use this going forward, once we kind of standardize fully on a port template, you can export the Uplogix's configuration, and then you can use that exported configuration to auto configure other Uplogix. So, for example, if you've got, and this is the plan with VA, we're going to have the first 4 ports and the first 8 ports on every local manager are going to be the same thing pretty much. Port 1's going to be router, or port 2 the switch, something like that. The exact details we haven't got 100% nailed down, I don't think, but they're going to follow a standard model. And so, that is going to allow us to, create an exported config that we can then use to, easily configure new local managers without having to go through and configure every port or configure the out-of-band portion. All that will be part of the config export that we can then use to push back down. So, when we do that config export, it's an XML file. So, grab your favorite, and actually probably we will help you with this, but usually I'll grab an XML editor like Notepad++, and then you can pull out, unique stuff from the unit that we exported from, host name and IP being the main things. And then you can take that modified file, load it into the file archive, and then use the config import job to import that configuration and to auto configure the Uplogix. There's also an option to do it on the command line, right? Just like our update, you can get those files from the control center, from FTP or SCP servers, or you can put it on a USB drive and we can import from there. And so it just reads that XML, imports it into the Uplogix configuration, and that configuration goes into effect right away. So we have also built into the Uplogix Control Center a proxy. It's actually, we built a SOX proxy into the back end that can help you with connecting to certain systems. Originally, one of the main uses we had for this was connecting to a particular modem bank through a SOX proxy. For you guys have a modem bank that's just on the same network, so you don't really need it as much. But it's in the system. It's something that you can use to facilitate connections to certain systems through a proxy system if we need that. This is another great feature, the RSSH tunnels, and we've talked about these a little bit, but this is a great feature where the Uplogix creates a SSH tunnel back to the control center. And then users can use that SSH tunnel to connect to the Uplogix on the far side. Usually people end up wanting to use this when they have their local managers behind firewalls or a NAT, or if their local manager, for example, a lot of cellular modems, when you turn on your cellular network, you end up in a private network and there's no routes into that network. The Uplogix can route out on the cellular, but there are no routes in, so nobody can SSH in. And so in that circumstance, the RSSH tunnel is really great. It builds a tunnel out of those private networks to the control center, and then users can use that to get SSH access. So that's a great feature. I really like that one. It's almost like building a ad hoc hub and spoke VPN with encryption and everything. Once you've got those configured, that's going to show up on your summary page for each local manager. It's next to the Ethernet connection light. And if that SSH tunnel is up, we'll light that light up, and then you'll know that you can use that to connect. When users hit that SSH button first, it attempts to use that RSSH connection. And then if that doesn't work, it tries to go directly via SSH. So it's kind of a failover system that way. So another feature that we support is port forwarding. And this is a feature where we take the console connection to the managed device or a TCP port connection. Let's say you've got a web interface you want to get access to. This port forwarding and protocol forwarding lets us get you access to that stuff through the Uplogix. Basically, the Uplogix makes a SSH tunnel either from the serial port on the far side to a local TCP port on your workstation. Or if you're trying to access like a firewall's web interface, for example, we can create a SSH tunnel to get you access to that TCP port for that. So it's a really versatile feature for getting you access to remote systems. Um, what we do with that is, they're a little different between the serial and the TCP, obviously, right? The serial port forwarding, what we do is we take your console connection and we just bring it back to a local TCP port. So a lot of times people use that if they have software on their local computer that wants to talk directly to a device's console port, right? Some systems have control software that wants to be directly connected to the console port. This lets users connect that stuff remotely through that SSH tunnel to the remote system. More likely, what you guys will be seeing is the TCP stuff. That serial stuff is mostly satellite equipment. But with TCP, we can get you a SSH tunnel that connects you to a web interface on a system on the other side, or Telnet or SSH if you want. Any TCP port service that is running on a managed device, we can create a tunnel to get you access for that. So that could be things like, yeah, web interfaces, remote desktop, or even the server lights out management network ports. We can forward those connections back to your workstation so that the Uplogix can give you access to that stuff, directly through a SSH tunnel. Works great with basically any service that you want to access. That's a great feature. So if you want to configure that, on the serial ports, you don't have to do anything. It's part of our terminal applet. But for the TCP ports, you need to configure that at the port level. So, if you've got, for example, a firewall on a certain port and you want to get access to the web interface, just go to that port and run config protocol forward. And you get the option to either use the management port or the dedicated Ethernet, right? And then, you tell it which to use and what port to connect to. In this case, 3389, that's remote desktop, right? But, you could put port 443 in there instead. And you can specify the protocol if you like too. If you give it, HTTPS, for example, that means that your workstation is going to know what program to use to open that connection when you get to there. And I'll show you how that all works here in a moment, in a live thing. But yeah, so here's port forwarding. Let's see here. Yeah, you have to have permission. You can use either our SSH applet or, we have instructions for configuring that in other SSH applications. Here's how it works in the CLI applet. And actually, this will be easier to see if I pull it up on Control Center full screen here. So if I go back to, happen to know I have this set up on one of my demonstration units. So if I log in and head on over to demo pod 3 here, I have a Palo Alto on port 52 that we're going to do some protocol forwarding to. So if I go back to here and I open my SSH application, that's going to go ahead and load up that. There we are. I got using the RSSH tunnel in this case. Give me my username and password prompt. Got to type the password right now. There we are. If I go to that port 52, I can show protocol forward. And you can see I've got it set up to forward to our web interface on port 443. So if I just go to terminal and I select forward here from the drop-down menu, it gives me a little picker here where I can turn that on, right? Local port is going to be 443, remote port, same thing. And then if I click this button, it'll automatically go ahead, open up a HTTPS connection. And you can see up there it says, 127.0.0.1, that's localhost. So that's my end of the SSH tunnel. And then the other end of that SSH tunnel is out there with the Uplogix connecting to the Palo Alto's web interface. So this is great for getting access to these sorts of systems. even, over the out-of-band connection. This is, of course, TCP based, so it's going to require the, either cellular for that or IP based out-of-band connection. Of course, you can use, other SSH clients to use that protocol forwarding. It takes a little bit more setup, and it's documented on our support site. If you ever need to do that, we can help you with that. This is what it looks like in PuTTY. Basically, you go into the SSH options, to the tunnels section there, and then you let it know what your local port's going to be and which port to connect to on the far side. In this case, port 11, TCP port 80. So pretty straightforward. Serial port forwarding works very similarly. It doesn't require as much setup. Beforehand, you don't have to tell it which TCP port to connect to because it's just using the serial port. Again, this is a feature that you guys probably won't end up needing to use unless you have some really arcane network equipment with weird interfaces. So yeah, regardless of what client you use, we do use the SSH session to create those tunnels. So if you are in the middle of using those and somebody were to, log out, that's going to close the SSH session. And so all the tunnels that are carried over that SSH session will close as well at the same time. So we've talked a little bit about this. The secondary Ethernet has a capture mode where we can do TCP packet captures. Basically you just connect the secondary Ethernet to whatever you want to collect traffic off of. A lot of times people end up putting a switch port into what they call promiscuous mode, where it carries all traffic. And then we capture those files locally up to 5 megabytes. And then once you have that, you can review that data. This is configuring the secondary for capture. Once you have that configured and you do those captures, you can review them. There's some filtering you can do though for that, beforehand if you want. If you want to specify a particular host or network, particular TCP port, source or destination, right? Those are all options that let you filter what we're capturing. If you're, looking for a particular traffic, that can help. Once you've got those captures made, you can review them on the command line using the show capture. It's going to just basically give you a summary of what's in the packets. If you want to really dig into what's in those packets, you want to probably export it. In this case, you can do show capture minus pcap. That's going to give you the very verbose version of those packet captures. And then you can either copy them off via SCP or you can email them to yourself so that you can load them into Wireshark and review them in there. And that's what we recommend. So this can be great if you're doing some real low-level troubleshooting. You need to do a packet capture to figure out what's going on with particular network traffic. Why isn't this connecting? That sort of thing. The Uplogix can be useful for that. Kind of do it ad hoc. So for login, you can also instead, if you don't want to use usernames and passwords for login, you can turn on SSH key authentication. Now for you guys, probably this won't work because you're going back to AAA servers. So that would have to all be set up on that. In there, your RSA keys would have to be, copied into TACACS. So this probably isn't useful for you guys, but just so you know, you can use key pairs to log in if you need to. Once you've generated the keys, you just set it up under your user. Again, with you guys going back to a third-party AAA server, you're not gonna need that. That is upgrades and additional features. Let's go on, if there aren't any burning questions about that. Let's go ahead into the last section. This is going to be troubleshooting. And a lot of this is going to make sense based on what you've seen in the previous sessions, but I just want to go over this here. some basic stuff. So, troubleshooting, the problems that we tend to see, you tend to be in two broad categories. One is getting the Uplogix to talk to your managed devices, right? There could be certain problems that we see pretty commonly with that. And then usually the other problems you'll see are either network problems, more broadly, why isn't this protocol getting through? Um, or user permissions can be one that can trip people up. And then there's some, kind of hardware errors that you might see if you ever have a local manager die on you out in the field there. So first of all, yeah, managed devices. When you're trying to, configure a new managed device, when you're first getting one set up, one of the things, if you can't talk to a device, if it doesn't seem to be responsive when you type terminal, one of the big things that can be wrong is that the serial settings are wrong, right? Most devices talk 9600 baud, 8N1 with no null modem, no flow control, right? But some devices don't. And so, that can be a problem. If that stuff isn't set right, your serial connection just isn't going to work. Um, and so you can, use that with show serial or config serial to change those if you need to. But usually the detect command is going to find the right serial baud rate on most devices. Um, if that doesn't seem to work, you can use show serial to see if transmitted or received bytes are incrementing at all. There's a byte counter in there. So that can be helpful to let us know if, we're getting anything back from the device at all. Even if it's not displaying it correctly, you might still have TX and RX incrementing if a device is talking on console port. Also, DSR and CTS, those are serial signaling. That's how a serial device indicates that it's ready to send or receive data. And so a lot of devices, those will, if you run show serial, it'll say true for those. Most Cisco's is going to show true for that. If you're seeing false for that, then that might be an indication that we're just not plugged in all the way, or the cable might be bad, that sort of thing. Which leads us to the next one. That's layer one, right? Make sure it's plugged in firmly on both ends. If it still doesn't seem to work, sometimes you just have a bad cable. So try swapping it out. That can be helpful. And then, yeah, sometimes you might need to do a rolled cable instead of the straight patch cable. It just depends on the device you're talking to. Most devices with the Uplogix, we set it up to be a straight Ethernet patch cable to the most common devices, but there's sometimes when a device is, uh, what is it? There's a different serial standard that requires a rolled cable. Those kind of ribbon cables that you may have seen, the flat ones. Here's looking at it in the CLI, right? Doing show serial and kind of looking at what's in there. In this case, we have a device with DSR true, and that alone is going to light up that console light. If we see DSR or CTS, or if we see any traffic really, we'll light up that console light to indicate that we think we have a good connection there. If you've done all the troubleshooting on the last page and we still can't, talk to the device, we're usually going to ask you to verify that the device is actually talking on the console port, do a low level test with a laptop and a serial cable if need be, just to verify that the device is actually talking on the console port and to verify the proper serial settings. Show buffer, we've talked about this a little bit. This is part of the logging we do. Every serial port, we keep a rolling 1 MB text buffer of what's happened on that serial port. So even if users aren't logging in or our advanced driver is doing anything, we'll have a log of everything that's happened on that port. That might include, log messages from the device. So once you go to a port and run show buffer, you can search through there with the / and the question mark to search forward and backward. And then you can, of course, navigate with page up, page down, and greater than or less than take you to the beginning and the end of that buffer. So that can be useful for seeing what happened, previously, maybe a device has died and you want to check for the last log messages it gave out. Show buffer can give you that stuff. Also, if you're trying to figure out what our advanced drivers are doing on a port, show buffer is a good way to review that. If something doesn't seem to be working right, maybe an interface monitor doesn't seem to be working right, you can use the show buffer to review what's going on that port. Appliance and control center troubleshooting, uh, mainly you're accessing the Uplogix via SSH, so they need to be on the network. Um, we don't block ICMP, so you should be able to ping the Uplogix, assuming that it isn't blocked elsewhere on the network. Um, if you've got a device online and it doesn't seem to be answering to SSH, you can always try to telnet to the Uplogix IP address on port 22, and you'll see it'll say Uplogix if you do that. It'll respond with that specifically. And so we see this occasionally where people end up putting an Uplogix on the network and it has the same IP address of another device that's also on the network. That'll cause intermittent connectivity issues. You might be able to access it 1 minute and then you get hung up on just because with multiple identical IPs on the network, you get that sort of trouble. So those are some things to check. If the Uplogix is still not responsive, make sure you've got a link light on the network cable, Gigi 0. And of course, you can check to make sure that it has the right IP address set, either using that front LCD panel or, if you need to, via serial connection to the Uplogix and show system IP, which will include, link status as part of that show system IP. You want to make sure you've got the right IP and right gateway and all that sort of stuff, or, obviously networking won't work properly that way either. So heartbeat, that's how the local managers, synchronize with the control center. And of course, like almost everything in the Uplogix system, it's initiated by the Uplogix at the edge, which is the smart appliance, and it reports back to the control center, which is just collecting information. That uses port 8443, so if you don't have a good network path from your edge units back to the control center on port 8443, then that's not going to work, obviously. Also, there's only a certain amount of tolerance they have for, being different versions. They'll be in minimal heartbeat unless the minor software version, in this case like 3.4 and 3.4, that matches enough. But if one was on 3.4 and one was on 3.3, then they would be stuck in minimal heartbeat, where really no data is really exchanged between them. But you can still upgrade the appliance from the control center. I should also mention if you ever end up with an appliance that's higher version than the control center, which probably should never happen, but if you do, they just won't be able to talk to it at all. If they're a higher version, it just won't show up even in minimal heartbeat. So that's a kind of one of those weird edge cases that, like I said, you probably won't see, but it can happen. For modems, there's a lot to this. It depends on the modem you're working with too. Generally, if the modem doesn't seem to be working, you can terminal into the modem and use AT commands. You can type AT or ATZ, and we should get an okay response back from the modem. If you don't see that, then we definitely have a problem. Either the modem's not connected or it's not working properly for whatever reason. But that's a very reliable low-level test you can do to verify the modem is connected and operational. If you can't talk to it, you might need to check the baud rate. Mostly that should be auto configured, but some things can get messed up, sometimes. So this is a big one for you guys. If the modem is not answering incoming calls, the two big things are show answer, run show answer, and you want to make sure that it's enabled so that answering is enabled and that it's also configured to allow, at least the phone number you're calling from or allow all. That's probably what you guys are doing mainly. On wireless modems, there's ways to check the signal strength. We have a whole troubleshooting guide about that on the support site, um, and some rules that we use to monitor that as well. Um, and then, if this can be a tricky thing to track down. If you've got an Uplogix that's on a phone line somewhere. If you're dialing the wrong number, then obviously it's not going to connect to it. One of the things you can do is terminal into the modem, and then try calling the phone number. If we don't see those ring statements, it's going to put ring across the console in all caps. If we don't see it ringing, then that might indicate that we're calling the wrong phone number. Um, at that point, you might try calling out from the phone number and just see what caller ID says for what the phone number is. That's been a good trick for us here and there troubleshooting things in the past. Um, if you can't log in, most likely what's going on is that you don't have proper permissions set. Now, you can always check that using show user in the command line. That's the best place to review the permissions, because it's going to give you not group membership, but it's going to give you the actual permissions on the system that you're on. But yeah, for you guys, mostly you probably aren't going to see this. Users are going to get their permissions based on their groups, and those are going to come directly from TACACS when you log in. So, for the most part, um, if you suddenly can't log in, make sure that your user permissions in TACACS haven't been changed. Is going to be the main thing to check at that point. Every so often, you don't see this one that much anymore, but every so often, Uplogix might get stuck on its serial number. That means that the LCD is just showing the serial number, or maybe just showing Uplogix, the logo, and it won't boot up. If it won't boot up and it's stuck like that, you can try restarting it. Uplogix support, they might try to have you factory reset a unit depending on what state it's in. But probably if it's stuck on serial number, that means that the hard drive has died or something. And so Uplogix we're gonna want to send you a replacement at that point. So just give us a call, send us an email with the serial number, and we can, help get that RMA going at that point. If a Uplogix won't power on, you're going to want to check that layer one stuff, right? Make sure you've got power coming from a operational outlet, right? You try reseating the power supply. Um, if that doesn't do it, then again, you're going to be in a situation where you're probably going to want to call support, and they're probably going to want to send you a replacement. The expansion cards. Now, sometimes this again something that we used to see more in the past and not so much these days. But every so often, a Uplogix expansion card will show unavailable in the dashboard. Um, the first thing to try, of course, is just try powering it off and back on. Sometimes those cards are not properly seated, so if you call support, they might ask you to unscrew it and screw it back in. Pull it out and make sure it's seated well in the place it needs to be, or potentially have you change which slot the card is in, to help identify if it's the card or if it's the chassis. Again, Uplogix support is going to be able to help you out with this if any ports show up unavailable. And, if need be, we can again send you a replacement. If you ever need to look through the Uplogix logs, you can do so from the command line using show_envoy_log. You're almost certainly want to give it a number. I think by default, we only show you about 500 lines of that log, and it's usually not enough to find what you need. But you can give it any number. It will show you that many lines out of the log. And, this is another one of those things that the support team might ask you to run this command and then to send them the output. Or, you might end up on a troubleshooting session and we're searching through it. You can use the same / and question mark to search through that log when you need to. And that is it, everybody, for our training.